And of course, the conversation is still continues right here on EKSE Live DSTV channel 263, the People's Channel. This is where we make sure we bring you guys more conversations that are much needed within our society. And of course, not just that, rather, but we also make sure we're sending our tips on how you can stay healthy and of course, umculo. So this is definitely the right destination on how you should be spending your 1 hour of Tuesday or Monday, though, just throughout the whole week. And see, but just before we had the ad break, right, for people that just joined us, we're speaking about a World Trauma Day, which is commemorated on this day, where we bring about our awareness about trauma, its effects, and we had a new caller speak on, the different types of trauma that we experience. And now that we've spoken rather to our experts, I want to hear from myself and you, Mana. What were our own personal experiences? Because I feel when you speak of your own personal experience, even the people at home are able to relate to your story. True. So have you ever experienced any traumatic things, maybe growing up, or now as you have grown?
I'm from the ghetto, so we live with trauma, and yes, I've a few times. If you remember with the conversation we had last week, where we were talking about abandonment and being abandoned and stuff. So for me, before I got exposed to it outside, it was inside the house, which is with my family. I saw a lot of violence with my dad being who he was. So we didn't really find, because it was very interesting with that topic we spoke about, because Lauren did say that her parents sat her down and went to counseling and stuff like that. But to me, we hardly ever do such stuff. So Kuti, we just moved on. That's what everyone like. I wouldn't really say I dealt with it, but I came to a stage where I grew up and I was like, okay, I do understand that this was happening in my life, and how do I deal with it? Because I don't want to drag stuff from the past. Because I can say that I don't hate my dad for what he did, even though it was wrong. Because if I have that in my mind, it's going to corrupt me. So even though I know what he did was wrong, but I still tried to build a relationship with him, because at the end, he's my dad. So yeah, a few times I've seen people being shot, stabbed and stuff like that. And that's why I said living in the ghetto, we speak about izinto like this formally, like, I've seen someone being stabbed and being shot, because it has become a norm for us in the ghetto. Like, it happens, so move on,
And of course, we're also joined by Ulwandile Ntombi Mzulu for this conversation, because we all want to hear what is it with the trauma, and you feel Ulwandile, it's very difficult, as Usibo has said, to move past that. And I think a lot of people don't really deal with trauma. They're just like, okay, you know what, it's happened, let me move on with your life. And you find it even affects their relationships, because Nicola even spoke about how parents raise their children because of trauma that they have experienced. Now, the way that they raise Abantwana Babo, it also affects them. Have you maybe perhaps ever experienced something like that?
I wouldn't say necessarily with the way I was raised or things that I've seen around me, but I just think life in general will rock you so hard sometimes that I've seen it more especially in relationships. I feel like when you are in relationships and something very traumatic happens to you, you tend to replay that situation with every single different person you meet. So let's say maybe you had a friendship and your friendship didn't end well. You are really good to this friend. You did everything for this friend. This friend just randomly does something so terrible to you. But the next time you love a friend like that, you will have restrictions. You will not be loving the same person all the time, and so therefore you put restrictions to it, and you think about it as like, I'm protecting my heart. I'm making sure that I don't ever have to go through that again. But really, the next person might not do what your friend did to you, but because you're traumatized, you'll never ever learn to unsee it a different way. And I feel like I've seen that a lot, especially with me. Like, I'll be like, okay, this is how I walked into things, and then I remembered how things can go south in 2.5 seconds. Then obviously I replay that situation, and then I'm like, okay, slow down, or do things differently, or don't show that you care this much, etc. So I think for me, it's affected me in my relationships, in the way that I show up for people, in the way that in the way that I show up for people, and in the way that I choose how far I'm willing to go for you.
Oh, yes, exactly. Because you're always afraid. Because if I'm going to temper the next thing you're putting your whole trust in them, and then only to find out that person's going to hurt you. But with other people, it's not really that intention. It doesn't really go that way.
Exactly.
So people build walls before
you build a wall before you even get to know a person. I think for me personally, Ichomayam is not really attached to a personal experience, but just living in South Africa as a woman, I think one day you would relate to this. based violence and femicide. And quite funny enough, I was having, you know, a thought in my mind this morning. Ukuthi, I wanted to wear a skirt namhlanje, right? Because Gashisa, you know, the weather is allowing. But I'm thinking I'm going to use the public transport, you know? And you know how uncomfortable it becomes for a woman because you have all of these men, they're staring at you. Abanye, they even go as far as saying, shouting, hey, my size, you know, and they're having all of those plays. For some people that might think, good to know, that's flattering, but as a woman in that position, you feel very unsafe. Because the moment you step outside your house, you never know if you're going to return back safely, you know? So those traumatic experiences and constantly having to hear, a woman was killed, a woman was mutilated, it's traumatic, you know? And even the way that we continue to live life, you know, the way that we navigate ourselves around these spaces, it becomes very limiting. You have to police what you wear, you have to police if you step out of your house, you have to make sure I'm sending my location to Ulwandile so that at least someone knows. You know, so it's society just generally for me, everything that's happening is very traumatic.
It really is. And speaking of being traumatic in general, guys, obviously we are talking about our traumatic views, but please do make sure you guys, we pose the question to you guys to how you deal with your trauma in your life. So please do make sure that you're hopping on our socials. It is EKSE Live on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. Please don't answer those questions because we really do need to find healthy ways of dealing with trauma. Like when Nicola was talking, I'm like, damn, like I might need to see you. I said, oh my God, I actually might need to go. And I'm laughing about it, but it's actually very serious. It's like I need to speak about how I show up right now for different things because of what has happened to me.
True. I think we found a way where we always like, we move on. And that's with what you just said, Mihlali, where we're like, you move on. Okay, I've dealt with it. I've accepted this. Okay, this happened in my life. Okay, no other way. Let's move. Because also, to mention something else that besides at home, even at school, I was bullied at school, dog. I was known as that guy's the softie. So I used to carry lunch. You know, at school, they used to diss you for, my mom would, in lunch, dog, in lunch. And I used Danny prefect at school. I was a prefect at school wearing but you'd find kids dissing you for being that student. So it still happens now because I see it in Kungum Chanawam. So there's still a lot that needs to be done, but it starts with you actually noticing that, okay, there's this problem. Then the solution on how to deal with it follows after that.
I think the solution seeking is very important because, you know, as Nicola said, we live in a community and we are social human beings. You know, we have to make sure whatever traumatic experiences that we're experiencing, even if you don't necessarily at the beginning of the phase speak to a professional, but at least speak to your friends, speak to your mother, speak to your father, so that you don't have to go through those traumatic experiences alone because it can become very depressing and by even suicidal.